From a young age, I've had a desire to teach. I come from a long line of teachers in my family tree, so apparently I come by it naturally. Today's life story is all about my journey through the education system and my career as a teacher and private school principal in North America. These are my blue pill years, but as you'll see, there were plenty of lessons learned during this period. My elementary and high school education was almost entirely in Nova Scotia, except for 3 years in New Brunswick. In Nova Scotia, they have a different system, though, than New Brunswick. Nova Scotia at that time had a primary school, which is kind of like kindergarten, and went up to grade 12. And at that time, I don't know if it's still the same now, but New Brunswick started at grade 1 and went up to grade 13. The two systems are actually quite similar, but they use different numbering for the grades. Well, when I started school, I went to primary school in Nova Scotia, and I was identified at that time as part of the advanced group in my primary class, and they taught us how to read in primary in Nova Scotia. But then we moved to New Brunswick the following year, and of course they asked my parents, what grade was he in last year? And they said, well, he was in primary school. And they're like, well, primary school is preschool to us, so he'll start in grade 1. So I started in grade 1 and everything was fine, except I already knew how to read and these kids were learning the alphabet. And my teacher noticed that I seemed a little bored in class. And one day she asked me, she said, do you already know this stuff? And I'm like, yeah, I learned how to read last year in school. And they're like, oh, really? So apparently she told the principal, and the principal took me in, gave me a reading test, which I passed with flying colors. And the very next day, I started in grade 2 in New Brunswick. So I did grade 2, 3, and 4 in New Brunswick, and then we moved back to Nova Scotia. Well, we went to this tiny little school in Nova Scotia. It didn't even have a principal there. It was just teachers working at this tiny school. I think it had 3 classrooms, as I remember. And got there first day of school. They said, what grade were you in last year? And I said, I was in grade 4. Oh, well then you're in grade 5 this year. Not knowing that there was a difference between the New Brunswick system and the Nova Scotia system. So I ended up skipping a grade, which was kind of nice, although it did put me at a disadvantage in that I was always pretty much the youngest kid in my class from there on out. But I did well in school without putting in a lot of effort, except for this one time in high school, I think it was grade 11, I'd always taken the university preparatory classes, but this one time I decided I was going to take an honors class, and the honors class I took was in biology. And the teacher warned us that this is an honors class, but we didn't have enough students in the honors class program to have a separate class, so we took our class with the college prep people. And it was pretty much the exact same thing, except they said that we were also responsible for the contents of the book that they had, the curriculum book. And because it was the only honors class I'd ever taken in my life, I didn't really think that anything would be different when it came time for the exam. But when I got my honors biology exam, I looked it over and realized that every single question on the exam was from the parts of the book, the biology textbook, that we hadn't actually covered in class. And so I hadn't studied the book. I simply had studied what we had done all year, and I literally put up my hand in the exam room and had the proctor come and say, hey, could I switch back to university preparatory right now? And they're looking, no, you're in the honors program, you need to take the honors exam. I said, no, there's no point in me taking this exam. I would prefer to just switch down to the regular university prep course. And they're like, look, give it a try, see how you do. You may do better than you think. Well, it's the first time in my life that I ever failed an exam. And I had gone into that course with a 92 average. And I did so poorly on that exam, I think my final grade was in the low 70s or something, or high 60s, I can't remember. I passed, but it was an absolute disaster. In fact, I even met with the teacher, and we went over, he said, look, I gave you as much as I felt I could possibly give you based on the answers you gave, but I mean, it was a disaster, and I thought, yeah, I didn't even look at the textbook, had no idea, and I learned a lesson the hard way that day. But I figured out, at least from high school, that what matters in education is what you actually learn, and that grades are basically meaningless. So for me, grades, although I like to get good grades, I realized that grades really weren't that big of a deal. After high school, I went to a 3-year Bible Institute program, and then I transferred to a Bible college in Maryland, where I completed my Bachelor of Arts degree. And since most of the stories from my college days have nothing to do with education, I'll save those stories for another time. But I will tell you about this one experience that I had in Bible college, where I took this CLEP exam. So because I was transferring credits from this Bible Institute, which was not accredited, to a Bible college, which was accredited, they had to kind of slot everything that I'd taken in the Institute program and try to make it fit into their slots in their 4-year Bachelor of Arts program. And while most things fit, there was one big deficiency that we couldn't fit into my final year. So pretty much everything that I took in the final year was all the liberal arts stuff that I wasn't going to get at the Bible Institute. But even so, I was still one course short. And so they said, well, we have this program, it's called CLEP. And it's if you take this test, and if you pass the test, they give you the credit as if you had taken the whole course. I'm like, well, that sounds really good. How much does it cost? And it was like, it's not very expensive. It's like $100 or something like that. And I said, so what do I have to do? And they said, well, all you have to do is we'll give you the textbook, and you can study the textbook, and then that should have pretty much everything that's going to be on the exam, and you can see how you do. So at the time, I was working as a guard, a nighttime guard just at the gate, letting cars in, that sort of stuff, just to get a little pocket change. And I would use my time sitting there in the guard shack reading this textbook. And literally all I did was read the textbook from cover to cover. It took me about a month to read the whole thing. I didn't study it. I literally just read it through. And then I took the test. And I realized when I took the test that it's like, a lot of these answers just make a lot of sense. It was a physics exam. That's what I took. It was a science course for physics. And I'd always wanted to take physics in high school, and I made the mistake of taking chemistry instead, and I regretted that. And so when I had the opportunity to take a science course, I said, well, I want to do physics. And I ended up passing that and getting my CLEP credit, which was really good. So I was very, very pleased with that. So if you ever have the opportunity to take a CLEP test, I would strongly recommend it. It's a great way to get some credits quickly and cheaply. So after graduating from Bible college in 1990, I got married that summer, and we pick up the story 5 years later when I got this call from a little Christian school in Maine that they wanted me to be one of their teachers. Now, if you want the backstory on what happened in that gap, I suggest that you watch the video about the deal that I made with God. The year was 1995, and we had made the decision to move my family of 5 to Maine, which was easy for my wife and kids since my wife was a U.S. citizen, and therefore the kids were all U.S. citizens through her. However, I had to apply for a green card in order to get paid in the United States. We also needed to sell our brand new mobile home without losing our shirts on the deal. So, since my wife's parents lived in the area that we were moving to, she and the children moved during the summer of 1995 to be there in time for the first day of school. I would come as soon as I was, quote unquote, allowed. We sold the trailer, and I moved into a hotel in Nova Scotia on a week-to-week basis. Although I was eager to get back with my family, I was enjoying the last days of my graphic arts job that was paying me the most money I'd ever made, working in Halifax, and I was banking as much money as possible, knowing that lean days were ahead. For more on that, watch my most recent video about the miracle in the refrigerator. I finally arrived in Maine in December, so we decided that I would start teaching at the beginning of the next term, which was right after Christmas. This was great because we had to move into our new home, do Christmas and everything there, and figure out what I was going to teach. On my first day of teaching, the principal of the school, the same woman who had called me and asked me to come and be a teacher, decided that her job was too stressful, and she quit. She literally walked out and never returned. I didn't even get one full day working under a principal at that school. So the school board held an emergency meeting and decided that the most appropriate thing to do was to appoint a man, he was one of the school board members, to assume the role for the rest of the year. Now this man had no clue what to do, and he spent most of his days in the gym shooting hoops by himself, except for when a teacher would bring an unruly student to him for discipline. That was about the only thing he thought the principals did, was they disciplined kids. So since the guy in charge had no clue how to run a school, the staff all looked to each other to get the real stuff of the school done. And most of the time, I was the guy who did those jobs, even though I was the most inexperienced person on staff. At the end of the school year, everybody realized that the guy that was in charge was not worth keeping around. So the board approached me with an offer I couldn't refuse. After teaching for only half a year, they offered me the job and the title of school principal without relinquishing any of my teaching responsibilities for the next school year. So full-time principal and full-time teacher. The raise in pay was, of course, zero.
Zero!
Naturally, I accepted. Our first year, with me as the leader of the school, was the best of my 3 years. The board was as supportive as they could be, and the church that controlled the school tried really hard to support the staff from the offerings of the church people. At that time, the church was in between pastors, and an older gentleman was filling in on a weekly basis until the church could find its man. It took a long time for the church to get a new pastor, but they did get a man with 3 sons, and having a Christian school was a big seller in getting him to come and work at that little church. Although I was working approximately 60 or more hours per week, I loved my job, and my relationship with my wife and my little girls was at an all-time high. I learned a ton that first year, and I made all kinds of stupid mistakes, but I realized that I was in the right place at the right time. Things started to go downhill, though, in the second year as principal. Not only was the new pastor's children given free tuition, but because his salary needs were much higher than what the church had been paying the interim guy, the church treasurer realized that the financial condition was becoming rather grave. So she called a meeting to discuss the new financial strategy. And the meeting kind of went like this. It was the school board and the treasurer of the church and the pastor of the church, myself, the principal of the school, and the most experienced teacher on staff. We were all in this meeting. And the treasurer got up in front of us all and she said, "Look, I'm going to tell you how we're going to have to do things." She said, "First of all, I need to let you know that the school is my #1 priority." Now, this is the very same woman who had been the principal of the school and quit. Just so you know, she was now she was the treasurer of the church. I don't know if she'd held that role. I think she'd been in that role before, even while she was the principal at the school. And anyway, so she was like, look, I used to be the principal of this school. I love the school, and it's my highest priority. I'm like, okay, we're all like, good, good. And then she said, so here's how it's got to be. When we get the money from the people of the church, the first thing I have to do is have to pay the pastor, and because he's staff. So he has to get paid first. And then we have to pay the taxes. And then we have to pay the utilities for the church building. And then we have to pay all the expenses of the church. And then we pay the school. And I said, and then what? She said, no, that's it. That's the order. I said, so you said that the school is your number one priority, but it's actually your lowest priority. Well, some people who were sitting there started to laugh at that, and she was not very happy that I would point that out. I think she wanted us to believe that although we were the lowest priority, that somehow, because she said that we were the highest priority, that we would believe her that we were actually the highest priority. So, yeah, that was our new reality. So we struggled to get through that year, but while payments were sometimes late, everybody ultimately did get paid what they were promised, which was pittance. I mean, I think it was approximately $10,000 per year per teacher. Of course, one of the big perks of working at a school is that you get your summers off. And that board member who had been the principal in the fill-in period, he turned out to be a professional tradesman who hired me as an independent contractor to help him paint houses during the summer. He was a really great guy. I made almost as much money in 2 months painting houses as I did in the other 10 months working at the school. Those painting jobs gave us just enough to get the credit card paid down and usually allowed us to start the new school year with a tiny balance at the bank. The third year, and last year as principal of the school, was pretty brutal. The church by that time made it clear that they could no longer support us at all in that year. And so we cut our costs by combining every classroom into 2 grades per teacher. I let any of the staff who wanted to walk away, and a few wisely took me up on the offer and did walk away from the school at that time with no hard feelings. Our enrollment was stagnant, and with only tuition fees to pay the bills, things looked pretty bleak. The school was very small, like less than 50 kids. We knew that promising a set salary, as pitiful as they had been, was a waste of time. And we agreed that we would get paid on a rotation basis as money became available. The board members did as much as they could to help us out financially, but by the end of the year, we were all considering going on welfare. We had been told by the local government employee that we knew that we would qualify for welfare while we were still getting paid whatever little we were receiving. However, none of us actually went on welfare. Somehow, we got through that year without any of the teachers quitting, but we were all in pretty bad shape. At the end of that year, I made the proposal to the church that if the school was going to be viable for the next school year, we would need to further combine classes so that each teacher would teach 3 grades, reducing the staff to just 4 teachers. When I was in grade 5 as a kid, the year that I skipped a grade, the public school that I attended was so small that they incorporated a 3 grades per classroom method. And I knew that our teachers that we had could pull it off. However, the pastor of the church vetoed the idea, saying that he felt that the educational quality of the school would be lowered too much to make the school worth attending if we did that. The pastor insisted that we continue on the next year as we had done in 1998-99. I told the board that if they insisted on pursuing a similar strategy to the year that we had just endured, that I would have to resign. They insisted, and I resigned. And when I did, all the other teachers of the school resigned on the same day. Sadly, that was the end of that school. It really wasn't financially viable, but we had a wonderful 3 years. One of the board members, after that, took me aside and said that they thought that it was a shame that I wouldn't be able to work at the school any longer. And as a token of gratitude for what I had done over the past 3 years, she and her husband offered to pay for my first year of tuition if I enrolled in a master's degree program to become a school principal. After all, they had thrown me into the role without any training, and she thought it was only fair that since I had been doing the job well, that I should probably get trained and do this more somewhere else. I accepted her offer, and we ended up moving to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania that fall, where I enrolled in the Educational Leadership and Administration program. Although my tuition was paid for, I still had a family of 5 to provide for, so I looked for a job and a place to live. I attended the summer program to get a jump start on my master's degree, which had me living in residence for about a month. Because they try to cram an entire semester worth of work into 2-week intensives, the workload was intense. However, I managed to find an apartment that looked decent, but they wouldn't accept my application until I had a job lined up. Finding time to do job interviews was very difficult, but I found this job advertised that looked perfect for me. I'll save the story of how I got that job for another day, but suffice it to say that I got the job and the apartment at the last possible moment. I graduated in 2001, and I applied for the principal's job for the following school year. There was a Christian school connected with a church, much larger than my first school in Maine, in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island, Canada, that was looking for a man with a master's degree. According to the board of this school, everything in Charlottetown was looking rosy. Enrollment had been growing year over year. The retired public school principal who had been filling in raved about the wonderful opportunity that this was. They were putting the finishing touches on the first major expansion of the school building while they were bursting with pride to be able to show off a new principal who had a master's degree in educational leadership. It seemed like a perfect fit. And add to that the fact that it was in Prince Edward Island, which is part of the Maritime Provinces where I grew up. I felt like I would be going back to my people. What could go wrong? Well, I should have listened to my gut when I visited the school for my interview. The building did indeed look shiny and new, and the halls were bursting with students. But you could have cut the tension in that school with a knife. The teachers looked depressed. The students were in full-scale rebellion mode. It was as though I had walked into a private battlefield, only I had no idea what the battle was about. I assumed that whatever it was that was going on would either be worked out by the time I arrived, or else I would be able to figure things out right away and get it straightened out. I was hired. We bought a lovely home in the country, about 20-minute drive from the school, and the board didn't want me to do anything until the first day of school of 2002. So I got to school on my first day to discover the train wreck. Unbeknownst to me, the battle that had been raging between the ideological school board, who wanted to bring in a strict uniform policy and to make the school more like a private prep school, and the parents who wanted to send their children to a sweet little Christian school where their children would learn strong morals and get a good education, was in full force. I was told that enrollment was approximately 150 students between kindergarten and grade 12 to start the year. Everything had been budgeted based on those figures. However, only about 120 students showed up for the first day of school. About an hour into my first day on the job, the school secretary and the school treasurer met with me and asked me to make some phone calls to see why 20% of the school's population was missing. I only needed to make one call, as I was told that the most influential parent should be called first. She told me that her children and the other missing children were at public school and that they wouldn't be showing up today, tomorrow, or ever again. She told me that she was sorry for me to have to be involved in this, but that she felt that the board had made it clear that the opinions of the parents were not valued and that the rules of the school had become oppressive. A meeting with the school treasurer after that informed me that without those students, we were going to be about $50,000 in the red, effective immediately. That, combined with some unforeseen expenses with the expansion of the school building, put us in some serious financial stress. I won't go into the long story of how we managed to tighten our belt and turn things around, but it took 3 years before that school was back in the black. It was a stressful 3 years, as the parents were right about the board, and it wasn't long before the board and I were having some difficult conversations. In the middle of all that drama at the school with the board, the church that owned the school, and you know the saying, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me, well, it was having some issues of its own. The church was a well-established pillar of the community, and they had the son of one of the most respected teachers of the local Bible Institute, the same one that I had attended, as their pastor. However, this pastor was getting close to retirement age and was suffering some health issues. So they hired a young man to come in as the assistant pastor with an eye on him being heir to the throne at some point. Because of the lead pastor's health issues, the young pastor had many opportunities to preach. And invariably, every time he preached a sermon, the people would congratulate him on a fine sermon, and people would say how much better his sermons were than that of the older gentleman. At first, the young man took the praise under advisement, but eventually a group of parishioners convinced him that he should be the man in charge. Now, once he convinced himself that he deserved to be the main pastor, he set out to make it happen. Politically, it made sense for him to have the principal of the Christian school as his ally. So one day he invited me to lunch, and he asked me if I would support him as the lead pastor of the church. I said I'd be happy to support him when the time comes, but that he should be patient to wait until the time is right. He then made it clear that he did not wish to wait and that he wanted my support in a coup d'etat. I told him that I had no interest whatsoever in such a move and that I would not support him. This, of course, made me part of the problem. He held off for nearly a year after that, but in the meantime, he poisoned the well against me with the board, who already had some philosophical challenges with me. Near the end of my 3rd year at this school, when the school was back in financial health, I was called to a special meeting with 2 of the board members. They told me that my contract was not going to be renewed for the following year and that I would need to find employment elsewhere. They expected me to fight them on it because they knew that I knew what was going on. And they knew that I would feel justified to call out the young pastor and protect my job. But I felt a sense of peace about the matter, and I told them that I would not challenge their decision. There were several parents who asked a lot of questions when they heard that I was leaving, but I decided to tell them that I had decided that it was time for me to move on. There was a teacher who we had identified as a good candidate for leadership, and we had made him the vice principal of the school that final year that I was there. He didn't attend our church, and he had no problem with any changes there, so he slipped right into the principal role when I left. That school is still going today under a new principal, this young guy, but the young pastor's tenure as the leader at that church did not last very long. Although my 3 years there were challenging, I felt like some of my greatest career accomplishments occurred there. When I left, the atmosphere at the school was night and day different from what I had experienced when I visited for my interview. The staff felt protected and cared for, the students were happy, the parents were proud of their school, and the books were balanced. Because I had to look into everything to find ways to cut costs, I discovered that we were spending several hours per week teaching the provincially mandated courses that we didn't need to spend. I saw that we could literally carve out half a day per week to do whatever we wanted to do and still meet all of our course requirements. That led me to propose to the board that we dedicate every Wednesday afternoon to the arts. And since we didn't need to offer these as school courses, we could invite parents to come in and teach things that they were passionate about. Teachers and parents alike would come up with some artsy concept, each term, and the students would then choose the art that they wanted to participate in. So grade didn't matter, they just all went together by their interest. No grades, just fun learning. Parents and students alike loved the idea. It allowed for lots of practice time for special presentations like plays and musical performances that the parents and the community would attend. And when I left that school, the board honored me by creating an annual award given in my name to the student who excelled in artistic pursuits. And I believe they're still doing that to this day. And every year somebody gets that award in my name. So that was pretty special. My education journey continues and ends in Brazil. But there's too much to that story to continue with that here. You may be thinking that with so many challenges, I must have been stressed out all the time at these jobs. But the funny thing is that I always felt like I was where I was supposed to be, doing what I was meant to do. I love a good challenge, so for me, while there were a few stressful days along the way, I was mostly loving life. I wouldn't have traded these days for anything.